caught surprised by the way we looked. The years had changed us too. We smiled and both embraced like old friends often do.
Hello again. Welcome to another Gung Ho show. It's October 20th, 2020. You know me, I'm Joe Giannini, a Vietnam combat vet, and then after that, a criminal defense lawyer, over 40 years. My co-host is Jim Henry. He could tell you a little bit about himself.
I'm an investigative journalist and attorney and economist. I've written a lot about Trump and his various international connections, including Russia and former Soviet Union, but also much wider than that. So,
the name of this show is The Russian Connection because based on what I found out, I know that Trump has a Russian connection. His name is Felix Sater. And Jim actually, in 2016, wrote an article. Just tell us briefly what that was about. You mentioned Sater in there a lot.
well, after the 2016 election, December, I published this piece that went through Trump's private Russia connections and his connections to people in countries like Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan and a whole network of offshore entities. And basically what I was interested in was, first of all, this story had gotten almost no attention during the election. But secondly, it wasn't a question of President Putin and the Russian government necessarily hijacking the election or interfering in Trump's election. We had a whole Mueller investigation that went into that theory in some detail. I was interested in how Trump got to be Trump. And he had had 6 bankruptcies. Now we count 5 or 6 at least. In the 1990s, he had no access to the US banking system for loans. And yet from 2000 on, he starts reinvesting in real estate projects and rebuilding his financial portfolio and his visibility. And so everything about his recreation was a kind of mystery. How did he finance his recovery? And it turned out that, he got some of that from The Apprentice and his success on television. But his real estate deals were uniformly unprofitable. They had all of the signs of outright money laundering deals. We know now that he didn't pay any taxes for 20 years. That probably helped. And even before that, all the way back to the 70s, he didn't pay taxes. But basically, who was financing his recovery after 2000? Well, it turned out he relied heavily on some very dodgy investors from places like Kazakhstan, Russia specifically. And he relied on a handful of really critical connections with these folks. Separately from this, I had investigated the Russian mafia in the 1990s. I had a good friend who was a leading expert on the Russian mafia, Robert Levinson, who was a lead FBI agent on Russian investigations. He disappeared in Iran in 2007, so he's sorely missed. But he had looked at a number of Russian gangs that had penetrated Long Island, specifically the Mogilevich gang, which is based out of Moscow. Mogilevich had a far-flung network of people. Up in Canada, he had a partner called Boris Burstein. In the case of Long Island, he sent a guy here named Michael Shevaransky in the 1970s, and he set up shop in Long Island. Shevaransky's son was a guy named Felix Sater.
Felix Sater was actually born in Moscow.
Yeah, he was born in Moscow, and then he comes here as a young man, and he grows up in basically in Brooklyn. And he involves himself in a lot of financial activities in the 1990s. one of which led to a big stock fraud prosecution by the Eastern District of New York. Anyway, let's come back to that. Just to round up the Mogilevich crew, because that's the critical pattern here. Boris Bernstein's son-in-law becomes Donald Trump's business partner in Toronto, a guy named Alex Snyder, not Sater, but Schneider. And they build the biggest building in Toronto, Trump Tower, Toronto. In Panama, there's spooky connections with Trump's investment in the Panama Ocean Club. Felix Sater in New York was the principal facilitator of a big building called the Trump Soho, which is $400 million, opened in 2008. The interesting thing about Sater, who's Shevaransky's son, that he and his father, Shevaransky, both got plea deals with the Eastern District of New York in late 1998. They were both prosecuted. The chief prosecutor there was Loretta Lynch and Andrew Weissman, who later became a prominent figure in the Mueller investigation. They cut Felix Sater, the son of Shevaransky, a secret plea deal. It was well known to the people who were other parties in the indictment. I think that the people who were also fellow indictees in that case, there were 19 co-defendants in the Copa case.
Not
You
really.
defended some of them, but they were pretty much aware that Felix was a confidential informant.
Oh, let me just,
But let me just finish this. The point is, Felix went on with the benefit of this secret plea deal, which was kept hidden from all investors, outside investors, to basically become a critical part of Trump's financial recovery. I think you could safely say that there are a lot of different factors involved in Trump's rise here, but without that kind of injection of Russian finance and offshore finance in general, you would not have had Donald Trump's recovery. And so the big picture is that in the 1990s, Russia went through basically a Great Depression. They had the fall of the wall. Money was pouring out of Russia. Nobody wanted to invest in Russia.
you're talking about money that was stolen.
It was basically 25 or 30 kleptocrats and organized crime types got their hands on the principal assets of the Soviet Union. And then the next thing they did was to move them outside the country because they couldn't bet on the stability of Russia as a place to invest. And so they were looking for deals, money laundering deals, and investments all over the world. And they came to Brooklyn, they came to New York, they came to Panama, they came to a lot of these places. And that's the fundamental original sin in this whole story. Now we're on the verge of an election. People have Russia fatigue. They've heard all about Russia, they think. But the point is that the Mueller investigation never got into this financial stuff. It never really went into the network of private Russia connections, of private foreign money that came into Trump. And that's the stuff that was never investigated by Congress or by Mueller.
Let me fill in some facts here. I knew of Felix Sater as of March 2nd, 2000. A client of mine, Danny Persico Jr., was part of this big mob case in the Eastern District of New York. The feds were alleging that the mob infiltrated Wall Street. They were right. When I went to court with Danny on March 2nd, 2000, they handed me this indictment. And as soon as you open it up, you realize that a number of people are cooperating witnesses, and one of them is Felix Sater. So right away, that very day, March 2nd, 2000, me and my client, everyone else that was there, all the lawyers, all the defendants, we knew Felix Sater was an informer. Salvatore Lauria was an informer. Gennady Klatzman was an informer. So we knew that. And along the way, we found out that he had taken a plea in 1998, right? A plea to racketeering conspiracy, and entered into a cooperation agreement with the feds, FBI. The person that signed off on the person that flipped him is Andrew Weissman, who's very friendly with Mueller. He actually worked with Mueller when Mueller was appointed special counsel. And he brought up Felix Sater's name a number of times during that investigation. So what happened is he took a plea and he disappeared. But we found out that he went over to Trump Tower around 2001. He got involved in a business that was already set up by another guy, I think it was a Russian, called Bayrock.
Yeah, it was actually a Kazakhstani, Tariq Arik is his name. There's pictures of him with Donald Trump and
Yeah.
Felix Sater. They set up Bayrock about 2002. as a
Now
New York
remember
company.
this, Mueller was appointed the head of the FBI by Bush 43 in 2001. Sater, for sure, is at Bayrock in 2002, in the Trump Tower, maybe a floor below the Trump organization, and he starts doing business with Donald Trump. They basically laundered $1 billion. That's what they did. That's the Russian connection. That's why Trump rebounded, and that's why he became the president. It was a Russian connection all along. The problem for us, citizens, is that the Russian connection, Felix Sater, was being protected by our government. The government kept secret the fact that he was a felon. And when I say the government, I'm talking about the FBI, Department of Justice, federal judges, and Mueller. They knew this. And what happened is he was doing things that law enforcement calls otherwise illegal activities. Whatever he was doing, remember, he took a plea, and he hasn't been sentenced yet. So he's out there committing more crimes. There's money laundering.
Well, what we call this is he's a financial Whitey Bulger, if you understand the reference in Boston. Mueller was actually in Boston in the FBI in 1985 during the Whitey Bulger fiasco. And for those who don't, you can Google Whitey Bulger and find out the whole story. But basically, they gave Whitey Bulger the freedom to commit a lot of criminal acts in Somerville, where he was a gang boss, while he was a confidential informant for the FBI. So this is almost an exact replica of that situation. Felix Sater basically keeps going on, committing crimes,
Yeah,
laundering
yes.
money. I mean, we have in 2013, 2014, laundering money for a Kazakhstan kleptocrat who leaves Kazakhstan with $300 million, goes to Geneva. Felix Sater, with the help of Rudy Giuliani's law firm, Bracewell, sets up his offshore companies in the Netherlands, and they're laundering money into the Trump Soho. This is 2013. And he's been continuing on in this sideline of laundering money all along. The problem that Mueller had when he came in as special prosecutor was basically he's had Sater, Weissman is his right-hand guy on the investigation, right? Weissman was also legal counsel for the FBI in 2011. Weissman's partner, Betsy Caldwell, was Sater's personal attorney when they were negotiating the plea in the late 2000s. She was at the EDNY when they negotiated the plea bargain.
Back up. The plea was negotiated by a guy by the name of Malmy, I think. She represented Felix Sater when he was sentenced in 2009.
That's
Leslie
right.
Caldwell and
Caldwell represented,
Karen Moore,
but
I
she
think.
was back in 1998. This is all kind of a web of names, and I can forgive people for having their eyes glaze over. But the problem is Weissman, who ends up being Mueller's right-hand guy, and Caldwell and Loretta Lynch. These are not raving Republicans. They were all deeply involved in enabling Felix Sater to become a confidential informant for 20 years for the FBI. So when it's 2015 and Sater's trying to get Cohen involved in Moscow deals and all that stuff. You know, they couldn't use Felix Sater as a witness against Mueller because against Trump, because he was compromised. He was the financial Whitey Bulger who basically enabled Trump's creation. And these people are investigating this guy. They can't.
Well, I know for sure because I was an attorney on the USA v. Frank Copa that Felix Sater finally got sentenced in 2009 in front of Judge Glasser. He was the original judge. And he basically got off.
You got a $25,000 fine.
And that was it.
No victims restitution for the $60 million. No jail time. It was just like, thank you very much.
And in 2010, a guy by the name of Fred Oberlander, remember, this is brought a RICO civil case in the Southern District. He brought it against Bayrock and Sater and I believe Trump for the money laundering, the tax evasion, the fraud, and the government went ballistic, went after Fred Oberlander. They still are after him. Now, Felix Sater was sentenced, and during his sentencing, I have his sentencing minutes, he admits that he was doing crimes from the time he took the plea right up to sentencing.
Yeah.
And that hiding his conviction led him, enabled him.
He continued doing money laundering for Kazakhstan kleptocrats through, 2014, probably to this day. He's still, I have him down in a place called Fisher Island laundering money. It's incredible. But the point to keep coming back to here, Joe, is just that this whole prosecution of President Trump, which was based on an orchestrated network, was, that was, I think, they could never get into these financial crimes where the real beef was
because they were involved.
Because they were compromised. That's the big picture.
I remember Trump saying about Mueller, he has a conflict. No kidding. Of course he had a conflict.
Well, what they claimed was, Sater always said that Oberlander and Lerner were trying to extract money. They were threatening to publicize the fact that they had been, he actually accused them of going to Danny Persico and telling them, revealing to Danny that he was a confidential informant. Well, you guys had known this since the year 2000. That was complete horseshit. And the fact that the EDNY went along with this shut up.
And they're still going along with it.
I was one of 8 journalists who sued in the Court of Appeals in 2017. Let me just say, we sued to get access to Felix Sater's his confidential files that are still under seal to this day, describing his pre-sentence report. If there was anything to a lot of the stories that he's been telling about being a CIA agent and helping the U.S. government, all this stuff, it would be in that confidential PSR report.
Right.
They've still kept it secret to this day.
You know something? That is a fraud, because I know now that Felix Sater's file in 2004 was sent to the National Archives, and it wouldn't have been sent there if the file was sealed. It was not sealed. It had never been sealed. It's all a lie. It's all a lie. And Judge Glasser requisitioned the file back in 2010. But Felix Sater, according to the government, had been sentenced in an open court. So, and it all came out. He was a government informer and committed crimes while he was. We have all of this. So all of a sudden, Mueller gets appointed special counsel. That is not a coincidence, because Comey started this Russian investigation. That was stupid. And they brought Mueller in not to get Trump. They brought Mueller in to keep a lid on what the government did with Felix Sater and Trump. This is, and I got in touch with Mueller, and I told him, "You're not going to do anything. You can't do anything." And then what did he do at the very end? He used Felix Sater as a witness, or his information against Michael Cohen. At the very end of the investigation, Felix Sater says Michael Cohen is lying about the Trump Tower thing.
Well, listen, let's just step back because a lot of people are going to get lost in this flurry of details. I think the big picture is, there's at the end of the day, a lot of questions. We spent a lot of time and money and congressional attention on an impeachment of Trump. We had a big investigation by Robert Mueller that lasted 2 years and spent 40 million bucks. Andrew Weissman has got a brand new book talking about, Weissman's problem is that he has to explain why the Mueller investigation failed, right? Well, he's pointing the finger at Mueller. He said he wasn't aggressive enough. Meanwhile, there's all this stuff that quite a few journalists now understand about Sater and the Trump finance connections in the background, never been touched by the prosecutors and the investigators. It's outright money laundering. It involves Rudy Giuliani. It involves, not only Donald Trump, but a whole network of people. And that's the only way you can explain how Donald Trump made his recovery.
In 2015, Overlander, like I said, the government came down on him with Sater and his sleazy lawyers, and Overlander got a lawyer by the name of Richard Lerner. In 2015, Lerner wrote an article called Secret Prosecution and the Erosion of Justice. And he was trying to straight out warn the American people about Trump, that he had a Russian connection, that he was involved in money laundering. The government went after Overlander and Lerner, and they were merely telling the truth. All along, they were telling the truth. And the government ruined them, and it's still ongoing. The problem, in 2018, I realized that this prosecution and the persecution was going on, and I got involved. Because I can dispute many of the things the government said about Overlander and Lerner, specifically about Danny Persico trying to kill Sater. That's an outright lie. But they got away with it. Up to now, they got away with it. So our president said, I don't have any business in Russia. He's right. All the money came from Russia to him. Mm-hmm. And he was in partnership with a Russian by the name of Felix Sater. They have two business organizations, Bayrock and Trump organizations, laundered $1 billion. Laundering money is a crime. However, Sater had a pass because he's being protected by the government. And Trump, there's a little crack in the law. If you don't know where the money came from, you could take the money. I can go to Jim and say, I got $1 billion. I want to give it to you. If you don't know where I got the money and nobody can prove it, you could take the money. But I stole the money. Because he Sater knew all along the money was stolen. So that's money laundering. He had a pass. Trump, I think, was smart enough to figure out what Sater was doing. And he knew he had a pass too.
Well, I think there's a lot of questions that we're still trying to answer with respect to.
I
think that's an interesting theory and it's worth testing because there is a puzzle here. We spent a lot of time investigating Donald Trump. I mean, he's been investigated numerous times, going all the way back to the casinos licenses that he got in New Jersey. How did he get those licenses? Some people think that he was an FBI informant, that Trump has been himself a long-term.
I've thought about that. I don't think there's any upside for that, but I think he early on realized that the FBI had an informer in his building, and he understood what he could do with that informer because he probably got some really good legal advice saying, something, I know for sure that you have an FBI informer in your building, Felix Sater.
It's like a poison pill to any case they ever bring against Trump.
And whatever he's doing, he's got to pass. Right. So you'll never, that's it. Whatever you do with him, you got to pass too.
If you notice, Sater has completely disappeared from the headlines. Nobody's interviewing him. He was having his picture taken with President Clinton. Oh. He's been he was on the cover of Newsweek magazine. No, that's the one.
Yeah. Here he is with Trump, I guess around 2007.
Yeah.
And here he is on the cover of Newsweek, I think, in 2000.
The informant.
2018.
There he is. Completely disappeared from view, and I doubt that we're going to see much from him again. If Biden wins, all of this will not be investigated ever.
And
And if Trump wins, it probably won't either. So
No,
we're
I want to end with this. I tried to get a hold of the House Intelligence Committee before they brought Mueller in. I was able to email one, I forgot his name, a long name, and tell him what was going on. And at the very end of the hearing, I was there that day. It was in the overflow room, but the screen was right where you were. At the very end of the hearing, this one congressman said to Mueller, "Did you investigate his financials?" Mueller said, "No." "Did you investigate his connections to Russian oligarchs?" Mueller said, "No." "Did you investigate anything about money laundering?" Mueller said, "No." That was the end of the hearing. And what was his answer? There was no answer. Of course he couldn't do that, because he was involved in it all, and he knew about it.
Well, I mean, that's a theory, you know. I think it's a mystery.
I don't
Robert
think-
Mueller is a
no.
Vietnam vet. He's a, you know,
No,
he's been a lifelong civil
Jim.
servant. I'm not gonna, you know, listen. I'm not gonna take sides against Mueller here.
Are you kidding?
No, I'm gonna say that the jury is out. I say we need another investigation of all this.
It's not going to
The
happen.
country has spent an enormous amount of time trying to get to the bottom of Donald Trump and why we ended up with him as a president. A lot of Democrats believe it was because of Russia's active interference in the 2016 election. I think that's hogwash. A lot of people on the Trump side believe there's nothing to any of these Russian connections.
Well,
I think that's hogwash.
all right, we're done.
I think the story is the financial story, and that's the one that you've identified, and the reasons why it's not been
Well,
investigated.
Yeah, the story is an incredible, is a criminal fraud that has been committed involving all of these people. From Mueller, actually, Bush 43 must have known that there was a Russian asset in Trump Tower. So the same thing with Obama. They knew all this stuff. They knew all this shit. But they never envisioned that, you know, this Russian asset would be doing business with a future president. It's like crazy.
Line.